All right, we're going to get started here. Thank you for joining us for an important discussion on sports betting with our esteemed panelists here. My name is Maslin Myers, and I'm an Assistant Director of External Communications at the NCAA. Just wanted to note that we will have a Q&A opportunity at the end of the session. Feel free to scan the QR code that's up on the screen to submit a question that'll be on throughout the session, so feel free to do it as a question pops up, and we'll get to those at the end. So thank you all for being here. Tom, I'm going to start with you. Before we start our panel conversation on sports betting, can you share with us some of the key findings of the NCAA's recent study on sports betting? What are we seeing in terms of student-athlete engagement in sports betting, gambling behaviors generally, and how does this compare to what you saw in previous iterations of the study?
Sure, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a timely question. We came out with a research study yesterday on the sports betting behaviors of NCAA student athletes. So I'm going to just share a few top-level findings from that. First off, though, I want to thank my co-author, Jeffrey Daravinsky at McGill University, our colleagues there. A number of folks on our research team assisted with this as well. In addition, there are a lot of NCAA staff members who are spending time and providing expertise in this topic. And I do want to make sure to acknowledge Mark Strothkamp, who is someone many of us knew and worked with until his unexpected and untimely passing 2 years ago. And Mark's contributions here were huge and very important for the work that I do. This study involved 20,000 student athletes who were surveyed via the faculty athletics representatives on each NCAA campus. We pre-specified 1 to 3 teams, asked them to survey the members of those teams, and then we statistically weighted the data to make it representative of the NCAA population. We had done 4 of these studies prior to PASFA. In 2018, we had expected to do a 2020 study, but we had to curtail that due to the pandemic. So this 2024 study is our first data collection after the proliferation of legal sports betting across the United States. When we think about gambling behavior more generally than sports betting behavior, one finding we have is that gambling behaviors in aggregate have decreased among NCAA student athletes over the past 2 decades, and you see that here in yellow. This is something that we do see in other non-student athlete data as well. There are fewer social gamblers generally than there were 20 years ago, more non-gamblers. And sports wagering is one component of what we more broadly talk about as gambling. Other things that fit into the gambling category are playing cards for money, going to casino, buying lottery tickets, and so on. Even with the proliferation of legal sports betting in the U.S. since 2018, we see similar percentages of student athletes betting on sports in 2024 as we did in 2016. So if you look at the top box in particular, that is the men in our study who reported betting on sports at all, even one time in the prior 12 months in violation of NCAA sports betting bylaws. And you can see across division, slightly lower percentages actually bet on sports in 2024 as compared to 2016. However, when we examine these data in a little more detail and look at how NCAA men who bet frequently engage in sports betting today, we see a more nuanced and concerning story emerge. So if you look at the bottom two boxes here, for example, you see, although there are what we term frequent bettors, who are folks who bet on sports once a month or more, that's the bottom left box here, we see slightly fewer of those frequent sports bettors in Division I than what we saw in 2016. We see more frequent sports bettors among men in 2024 in Divisions 2 and 3. And when we look at those who are betting on sports on a weekly or even daily basis, across the board, we're seeing slightly higher percentages there. So there may be fewer student athletes betting on sports, but those who are betting on sports appear to be doing it in a more frequent basis and potentially more potential for problem gambling sorts of behaviors. The numbers for women are generally lower than for men. This is common across other studies of sports betting, but you can notice some of the shifts there among frequent and heavy gamblers as well. And there's a lot more detail on all of these on the full report. One thing that we do see in a further look at these sports betting data, even though the minimum age to bet on sports is 21, in most of the states where this activity is legal, similar percentages of student athletes cut by those 21 and older and those under the age of 21, similar proportions are betting on sports. And basically, age doesn't appear to be a barrier, whether it's betting on sports or betting on sports frequently. Men or women, the percentages are virtually equal. And one thing we see when we look in more detail about how these students are placing their bets, age does not appear to be a barrier necessarily, even with legal mobile wagering, which is the second row there. Men are on the left. Similar proportions who are below 21 and 21 and older say they have bet mobily through an app via legal online sportsbook, and where that's occurring through a proxy bet placed with a relative or teammate or friend, we don't know. But there are some interesting things there to consider. The legalization of sports wagering in the United States has not curtailed the use of offshore sportsbooks. We still see a number of student athletes who do bet through those or who use local or student bookies. A troubling new finding that we hadn't seen previously is that more NCAA men say that they're gambling alone or betting on sports alone. So in that highlighted box there, prior to 2018, we saw about 6% of men said they most likely gambled alone when they gambled. That number is now at 15%. We don't see a similar change yet in the women's numbers, but this number, given that friends, family, teammates, coaches, could be a good backstop for student athletes who may be developing gambling or sports betting problems, not having them know that a teammate or friend or whoever is betting is potentially a troublesome finding here. Another finding that was interesting was that most of the stakes, the sports betting behaviors still involve low stakes for most of our student athletes. We are seeing, though, a little bit of shift at the high end, those high end numbers. You can see that the percentage who have lost in one day $300 or more has shifted higher. And a lot of those changes, even though Division I sports betting numbers are lower, the the highest proportion of those with high one-day sports losses are Division I sports bettors here. So something we'll continue to look at. The NCAA men who report betting on sports frequently appear to have expanded the array of sports on which they're placing bets. And you can see kind of before and after PASPA here, a lot of increases, not necessarily more students betting on NFL, NBA, NHL, and so on, but among those who are betting frequently, they may be engaging with a wider range of sports here, mostly pro sports, but some college sports as well. Increased legalization of sports betting coupled with technological enhancements have obviously changed how some of today's youth interact with sporting events. Betting habits are a lot different than they were pre-PASPA. So things like daily fantasy and bracket contests were big things pre-PASPA among our student athletes. Now we see a lot of folks betting on individual games, betting parlays, live in-game betting. 42% of men who bet on sports engage in live in-game betting, and 38% engaging in prop betting on the men's side. The increases in sports betting opportunities in the U.S. are surely related to observed increases in NCAA athletes being asked for inside information. And we've asked about this over the 5 iterations of the survey. The numbers are as high as they've ever been in Division I football, higher than they've ever been in Division I basketball, but maybe due to the high levels of education Division I student athletes are getting now, the percentage of Division I basketball players and football players who said they're sharing this information with outside sources is as low as it's ever been, close to 0. And we've heard a lot of the discussions. Several recent studies have talked about harassment of student athletes by those folks out there who have betting interest, often but not exclusively through social media. And these are the percentages of student athletes in various sports who say they've been harassed. Men's and women's basketball tend to be the highest. Division I tends to be higher than D2 or D3, but there's some of this going on across division and in Division I in a lot of different sports. We see some changes in problem gambling behavior. We look at folks who meet problem gambling criteria through a DSM scale. We see that about 2% of men and a smaller percentage of women in our sample actually meet standard medical criteria for having a gambling problem. Those last 2 rows sum there. And when we ask students directly, do you feel like you have a problem with gambling? Similar percentages, about 1% to 2% of men, lower on the women's side, say that they feel they have a problem with gambling or sports betting. Among those who are betting frequently, you can see on the bottom row, more than 5% across each division of folks who are betting on sports once a month or more say they think they have a gambling problem. Yet when we ask these students, do you know where on campus to go if you have a gambling or sports betting problem, or where to refer someone, only 10% of men and 12% of women say they know where to refer a student on campus. We have a lot of data attached to our report on some studies we've done of educational programs that are provided on campus to student athletes. More of this going on in Division I, and this may reflect some of the better numbers we actually see in Division I this go around than D2 and D3, particularly in terms of attitudes about sports betting. These attitudes have shifted in those groups that have received more education over the last few years. And there's, as I said, go to the report for a link to these studies. But another piece that we are looking at is how legalization and the location of schools within states that have or don't have legal sports betting, how that could be playing a role here as well. And what we see, this is Division I schools with the blue dots overlaid on the 38 states that currently have legal and operational sports betting. And if you look at those percentages on the side in D1, it's about 2/3 of Division I schools are in states with legal sports betting, just over half in D2, and close to 80% in D3, which is this one, are in states with legal sports betting, and we can actually look at it versus mobile betting as well. And D3 really loads very highly on those states where sports betting and mobile sports betting is legal. So that's a quick summary.
Thanks, Tom. Tim Fong, professor of psychiatry at UCLA, had hoped to be a part of this convention session, but given wildfires in the area, he was unable to travel in. Dr. Fong has a brief message for all of you about the mental health aspects of sports betting that we'll roll now.
Well, hello there. My name is Dr. Timothy Fong. I'm a professor of psychiatry here at the UCLA School of Medicine. I'm the co-director of the UCLA Gambling Studies program, and I'm bringing you this information from my office here in Westwood, Los Angeles, to talk about how is sports betting impacting student athletes. So really 3 areas I want to focus on where sports betting impact athletes' mental health. So number 1, sports betting and mental health. It's clear over the last couple of years, we're seeing more and more discourse of sports betting everywhere you look. Social media, mainstream media, the radio, television, school newspapers, talk amongst the team, talk even amongst fans, talk among family to team members. All this ongoing discussion of gambling has an impact on people. It changes the culture, it changes your viewpoint. And in the area of the student athletes, I've identified really 3 areas that I noticed. Number 1, I see a lot of student athletes that then struggle with performance anxiety. I worry about my performance on the field or in the pool or on the track because I know what I'm, quote, supposed to do. Number 2, this whole idea of being talked about all the time. Will you or will you not get 23 points tonight? Will you pitch a shutout or not? You now are no longer an athlete. You are a product. You're diminished or minimized, no longer just someone who's playing the sport. You're just someone who might be able to make money for someone else. That has a tremendous impact on people, on student athletes. I think it's important for us to remember that and to have people talk about what does it mean to you to have betting lines against your performance. And lastly, unfortunately, I've seen this more at UCLA. There's a lot of student athletes talking about, I no longer enjoy playing this sport, in part because of all this attention paid to gambling. And lastly, we know that athletes oftentimes will turn to gambling as a way to manage their own mental health issues, depression, anxiety, ADHD, just like how any human will turn to substances like alcohol and tobacco and cannabis in times of distress. So we see sports betting impacting everyday walking around mental health in 2 different ways. 1, impacting your mental health by having so much around it. And number 2, if your mental health is at risk, turning to sports betting as a way of self-soothing that. As a result of that, number 2, we oftentimes then see if the involvement in gambling expands, you can then, of course, develop what we know as gambling addiction or gambling disorder. And very simple, what does it, quote, look like? And instead, it's a behavioral issue where gambling and continued gambling, despite harmful consequences, leads to life problems. It's an addiction. It's listed as an addictive disorder in the same chapter as other substance use disorders. But we know that every person who goes through gambling disorder is going to experience differences in their addiction journey. For instance, one person might have issues with finances and lying and inability to sleep. And another person experiencing gambling related problems will have arguments with their family societal social isolation or conflicts with their own spiritual values of money and doing things for a quick buck. So bottom line is gambling addiction looks very different. It's hard to spot, but it really becomes contingent on us as supporters of student athletes to do early screening, identification, and training, and really encourage athletes to say that a gambling addiction is really no different than any other addictive disorder. It can be treated, and when caught early, we can save many, many, many things related to your college experience, your athletic experience, and of course, your mental health. So when you have men and women starting to gamble for real money in middle school, in elementary school, and in high school, and then when you're surrounded by 24/7 gambling, that will drive up gambling addiction rates. Gambling addiction rates go down when you educate and you increase level of awareness for everyone at an early age. When you say that messaging, such as gambling is not a reliable way of making money, when you have very clear gambling policies in place, when you educate people to say, just because you gamble doesn't mean you are a bad person, but here are the reasons why you're gambling. And if you're gambling to take away emotional problems like depression, anxiety, that's a mental health concern. That isn't an issue of character or willpower or greed. So screening, early detection, early intervention. Here's my roadmap for schools, for student athletes, for coaches, for trainers, for anyone involved with sports betting, is to think of sports betting as part of the mental health training, as part of physical training, as part of that athletic experience. And I put a call to action for all schools to increase the frequency of gambling education and behaviors for their student, for their student athletes, for their coaching staff, for the athletic department, and for the trainers, and for the family members. Number two, increasing the treatment capacity at your local schools. That means getting your clinicians who do the mental health work more skills on how to work with screening for gambling, how to address early gambling related problems, getting that clinical skill elevated. And lastly, third, really just thinking gambling is part of the athletic and college student athletic experience now. That means schools should have updated gambling policies that are modern, that make sense, and that have clear consequences for violation of those policies. We also need better collaborations where schools can partner with law enforcement and give student athletes a roadmap that if you are being harassed online, in person, by the phone, in media, here are your resources where you can go activate right away to address harassment.
Mary Beth, we'll turn to you now. Can you tell us a little bit about the work of the Tennessee Sports Wagering Council, what it is, how it interfaces with state legislators to put in place safeguards around sports betting? And then can you also tell us a little bit about how you interact with the NCAA, member schools in your state when it comes to reporting prohibited bettor activity?
Sure, yes, thank you. So in Tennessee, as I think the study fleshed out a few minutes ago, we are an online-only sports betting market, and the Tennessee Sports Wagering Council is responsible for overseeing regulation and enforcement of the Sports Gaming Act and the Fantasy Sports Act. We have a weird name, the Tennessee Sports Wagering Council. Most states would be called the Gaming Commission or the Gaming Control Board, but that's a holdover from when the lottery was the regulator and the Sports Wagering Council was an advisory part of the lottery's regulatory authority. But in 2022, the legislature moved regulatory authority over to a standalone state agency. We're fortunate that we are able to focus solely on sports betting regulation and fantasy sports, unlike other states that have casinos and you know, all kinds of things, gas station machines, the things that you see that can cause lots of complicated enforcement issues. We have one thing that we have to enforce, and it is sports betting. So we have a team of 19. Those are lawyers, accountants, auditors, investigators, compliance analysts, licensing analysts, And we are really in the weeds on everything that's happening with our operators. We have 12 operators, 12 sports books, we call them operators. We have about 59 vendors that are registered that provide support services to those sports books. Those are things like geolocation providers and identity verification services, data providers, entities that are really crucial to the functioning of the sports book. We have, at this point, I believe 13 fantasy sports operators. And you know, we work with them on every aspect of licensing, from the typical thing that you would think of with the way that casinos would license a gambling company, looking at backgrounds and making sure that they have money protected in reserves and that they're able to pay their winnings out. But we also, as an online regulatory agency or overseeing an online regulatory program, we focus a lot on how to prevent people who are not supposed to be wagering from doing so, and how to make sure we can really understand how the systems function to follow the law. That takes a lot of work, and it also results in us learning a lot of things, as you alluded to, that we often need to work with our state legislature to tweak the law and tweak our rules and make sure that we have a regulatory program that really accomplishes what the legislative intent is. We also do work closely with governing bodies, including the NCAA. I have with me here today our Director of Integrity and Director of Investigations in Sports Integrity, and also our Director of Engagement. And we have situations that come up from time to time that we learn from a sports book of someone who they believe would be a prohibited player under Tennessee state law. Under our law, the sports book has an obligation to report that to the NCAA. They also have an obligation to report that to us. So our first question is, have you reported that to the NCAA? And if you haven't, you need to do that, and then you need to show us that you did it, and they do it. We also, if we find that one sports book has reported an activity that they believe could be a prohibited player, which of course we don't have all of the information as to who might be a prohibited player. We just have categories of players, and by player I don't mean athletic player necessarily, I mean gambling player, a player on the platform. It could be somebody who's prohibited because they are an athlete, or because they're a coach, or because they work for a sports book, or because they are a member of our council. Thank goodness that's never happened. But we really rely on the governing body to look at, you know, when they were playing, when they were employed, when, where they were located. Is it a violation of their rules? Under Tennessee law, the law currently states that if a gambler, if a sports bettor violates a governing body's rules, they've committed a crime. They've actually committed a misdemeanor. So we take it really seriously to not presume that we know all the facts, but to work with the governing body to make sure that we get the information to them. We do have an obligation as a state agency, if we have confirmed suspicious activity that might indicate a crime has been committed, to refer that to law enforcement. We are not law enforcement. We are the regulatory body. We work with our state district attorney's offices, we work with our federal law enforcement, and we will send over information to them, and if they want to pursue it, they will pursue it. We really, I think, we have gotten to a point where we have a great system of making sure that not only the governing body is notified, but if we believe there could be more activity with other sports books, our investigators can go back through our back office functionality, because we have access to under Tennessee law, we're required to be able to access sports books, basically player account management system, so we can see in real time what is happening with all of their player accounts and with their betting activity, and we can independently audit and verify what's happening. We can also ask them, hey, did you see that there might be a player account involving this person? Can you give us whatever information? And if you find that there is an issue, you also need to notify the governing body. So really, to answer your question about how we work with the NCAA, it's really just, we want to make sure we're facilitating that communication. And I think you asked me also about our legislative work. So our Sports Wagering Council, we are, even though we have 19 staff members, we have what I would compare to a board of directors that is appointed by the legislature and the governor, 2/3 by the legislature, 1/3 by the governor. So we really, although I'm accountable as the executive director to our council, they are accountable to their appointing authorities in making sure that they're implementing the legislative intent and, of course, the governor's intent on how the law works and how our agency functions. So we feel like we need to have a really strong line of communication with our legislature also, and we do that in several ways. I mentioned our director of engagement. We're really proactive with making sure that we get in front of our legislative leadership and the committees that might hear issues related to sports betting or gambling overall, so that they know the work that we do. A lot of times, and I think that this is probably because initially our agency was part of the lottery, the legislature may not understand that we're an enforcement agency. We are a regulatory body. We're not promoting wagering. We're not, it raises money for the state, but that's not the function of our office. Our office is the protection of the public interest. So we want to talk to our legislative delegation about all the work we're doing to eradicate illegal sports books and prevent minors and prevent prohibited players and all of those things. And so we try to be a great resource for them about the issues we're seeing, and we try to make sure that we're implementing what they want us to do.
Mark, I'll kick it over to you to talk about some NCAA resources in this space. What educational resources are available for the membership as it relates to sports betting and student athlete support?
Yeah, so we use a golf bag approach, right? You need a different club for a different shot. And so we really try to have a whole bunch of stuff that we can make available to our members and the different groups, coaches, associations, whoever. So one of those resources, before I completely move on from Mary Beth, one of the resources is not a traditional education resource, but is exactly what she's talking about, is having, it's almost like a community of people who are involved in these issues. It could be the regulator, and it is certainly the sports books. It's a governing body, even a community of people similarly situated. So we communicate frequently with the professional leagues to see what they're experiencing. And what has happened is we serve a role to be part of that community. And so credit the regulator community as well, but specifically here in Tennessee, they do a great job. And it is hard. We help them get information, work with a school, confirm enrollment dates, eligibility, whatever, so that hopefully we're keeping people out of trouble, not in trouble, right? So anyway, that's one of the resources. But beyond that, I would direct you to our website, right? So we have a campaign called Draw the Line, and you can find it on .org. But there is a whole host of different resources that are to be used. And some are things that are prepackaged that you can just take, deliver them straight to your student athletes, your staff. But there's also the ability to take information and use it more creatively in a way that fits your school, maybe adds to something you've already done. But it's the center place where you're going to find most of those resources. couple other things you'll find online there are, we have a couple e-learning modules. We've had one that's specific to student athletes. You could use it with staff, but it's primarily geared for student athletes. It's narrated by athletes. It has a great feel, and we think it's short, but we want all student athletes to have visibility to that material. And then just this week, we've introduced an e-learning module specific to coaches. And we all know coaches have great influence over our athletes or with our athletes. They're communicating with them directly, and I think bringing the coaching community into that conversation about sports betting, harassment, people trying to get inside information, having open dialogue. Dr. Fong, and I hate he's not here, he's tremendous. Dr. Fong pointed to that, was just having dialogue, having awareness, bringing it up, communicating about it. So I think the coaching community was really important for us to add a resource to. So we're just constantly trying to look at ways we can add new things, again, to our golf bag, just so that you all, the membership, have resources that you need that fit what your role is and what your campus looks like and what your athletic population looks like. A couple other things we have that kind of spearhead is a relationship with Epic Global Solutions. Epic does lived experience presentations that come on your campus. We've talked about them here at convention for the last couple of years, but really a powerful message. I know a lot of the conference offices use IC360, another really, really good company, and they have a group of guys who do some lived experience work as well. So we support those types of initiatives, but we are in a deal with Epic that allows them to come out and work for you free of charge. So if you want to do that, you can certainly reach out to us. You can find information at .org there. We also have a thing called Signify. It's not a thing. It's a company that we work with who monitors social media for harassment during certain championships. So where we expect, or the data shows us, sports that are highly visible on a betting, aspect, we'll literally monitor public-facing social media, and then we'll work with a school, we'll work with law enforcement, whatever is needed in the event that we are seeing harassment take place. So we did that for the first time last year. We're going to expand that a little bit and continue to work with Signify. They're really an amazing company, and their technology reach is really, really impressive. So just another resource that we have. And then probably not necessarily a resource for us to give out, but our advocacy team out of DC has done a tremendous amount of work. And a lot of credit President Baker for his attention to this issue just generally. But he's very focused, and they're very focused on prop bets. But what gets lost in that conversation often is the advocacy work we're doing around anti-harassment legislation. And we've seen a number of states really step up and focus on that piece and really take that serious in finding ways to combat harassment there locally. So advocacy team does a lot of work and should be applauded for those efforts. And then SSI and CSMAS with their mental health best practice document. That may not feel like a gambling or a sports betting document, but there are resources there, and they point to telehealth. And there are people like Kindbridge, we've got others in that community poised to really help. And so all of those resources exist, and they may not be one thing or this thing, but together, collectively, I think there's a lot for us to offer. So.
Thanks, Mark. I've had the opportunity to see the Epic sessions on campus, and they're just incredible.
Yep.
So appreciate you touching on that. Now, Mary Beth, if a campus is concerned about current sports betting laws in their state, or would like to share their thoughts with about legislating protections for student athletes, how would you suggest they go about this?
Well, I can speak to what I would suggest in Tennessee. First of all, I think every school probably has a great government relations team or a lobbyist that helps work directly with their state legislature. Our role as the Sports Wagering Council is really to implement whatever the General Assembly decides is the best public policy. Now, often they ask us about data and situations that would help inform their decisions on policy making. And so if I wanted to make a change in Tennessee as a school, I would say work directly with the General Assembly, but please come to us as the regulatory body to get the facts to back up what you might want to advocate for, because we have the boots on the ground experience of seeing what's happening and seeing the numbers and seeing the $5 billion a year online sports wagering industry in Tennessee, and being able to explain why a potential change might have a particular impact that a school might see as beneficial. We're happy to help. I know in Tennessee at least, and I'm sure other gaming boards are happy across the country to help their schools end up with success stories for their student athletes and anyone that touches this area. So it is a team effort.
Awesome, thank you. Now we're going to open it up for Q&A in a little bit, so if you have any questions, please submit those. I will start here. This is for all of you. Do you foresee the potential pullback of penalties for betting on professional sports as backpedaling on the NCAA's traditionally firm stance against all sport wagering?
You want me to take that started? It's a really interesting debate or discussion around where the rules should be. We've got amazing data. But the way I choose to look at where we are with the current rule, where the rules could be moving forward, is I am really excited about the engagement with CSMAS and our SSI staff. Because historically, if you look at regulation at the NCAA level, it's around recruiting, right, or academic requirements or whatever. And a lot of times we look at advantages of schools, disadvantages, et cetera. This is a whole different deal. Sports betting is not about competitiveness between our member institutions. And so I think it's worth a reevaluation of where our rules should be, but then what are we bringing along from a mental health perspective? And that maybe it's time to look at things a little bit differently besides just, here's a violation, here's the withholding, or here's the penalty, here's the suspension. But we're seeing situations where student athletes are engaging in sports betting. Some, not all, some have a problem, right? And Tom's data shows that. And so I think, I don't know where the rule will land. I don't know where it necessarily should, but what I'm most excited about is that we're starting to look at this issue more than just, well, there's a rule that says you can't do it, and here's the penalty for doing it. Because it may not necessarily be getting us really where we need to go. So if that tees it up, but at least that's how I choose to look at it.
Appreciate that. Tom, we'll go over to you for this one. Based on the tables you presented, why do you think that D3 student athletes are betting at a higher rate than the other divisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's related to multiple factors. I think there's, when we look at the depth and breadth of the educational programming that's going on in Division III, it may be less than what we see in Divisions I and II currently. I think that plays a role because it does appear that this education is working to some degree in changing some of the attitudes around sports betting with those who receive it. I think there are potentially issues around whether Division III student athletes see it as directly applicable and relevant to them in the same way that a Division I student athlete might. I don't know that you need to explain it very many times to a Division I student athlete and say, you really can't bet. You're a basketball player. You can't bet on Division I men's or women's basketball games. There's some really important reasons why you can't do that. And explaining that to a Division III student athlete, it may not resonate in quite the same way. The connection, direct connection there to the contest that they and their friends on campus are playing in. I think the third one, and when you look at where sports betting is currently legal and operational, there is a high concentration of D3 schools in the Northeast United States, in states where there is currently legal mobile wagering. And I think that is playing an important role as well. It's available in much easier ways for them to access currently than we see with D1 or D2 student athletes.
Mark, we'll go back to you for this one. Does the NCAA plan to continue expanding online monitoring of harassment towards college athletes receiving threats after possibly, not making someone's parlay or making a mistake that causes a bettor to not win his or her bet?
So the question, are we continuing to look at expanding that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the monitoring.
yeah. I mean, we've chosen early on to take almost like a study approach to see how this will work. Interestingly, we also think a lot of harassment comes in through direct messages. And our project with Signify is all just public facing. So in talking with pro leagues, the Olympic folks, interesting, it's really hard to get, we're private, right? We don't want to let go of all this information. And it's really hard to get students, professional athletes to just let go of their direct messages to be vetted. So we're only kind of seeing the top level. So we had that going for us or wrestling with, and I think we'll continue to look at what sports are at most risk, where do we know the harassment's happening, and try to build that out over time where it makes good sense based on the data we have. And so, but we're constantly working with Signify to look at what's the best way to, in an efficient way, that's best for the student athletes, and it's all participants, just coaches and referees as well. But the people that are playing these championships, what's the best way to do that? So I do think we'll evolve it, but there's a lot goes into how we do that.
Thank you. Mary Beth, this one's for you. How does a current college athlete get involved in lobbying on athletic-related issues for their career, and do you have any tips for them?
Well, how does a current college athlete get involved in lobbying for an interest that they have to advocate for? Not lobbying as, okay, yeah, I thought, because it said as a career. Well, that's a different answer. So I say you should always go to your state rep and your state senator and talk to them first and say, I live, on Jones Street, and I am this age, and here's a little bit about me, and here's what I think we should do to make your district better, and here's why. And I've found that legislators are always happy to talk to their constituents. Our Tennessee legislators are, at least. Always happy to talk to their constituents and hear their concerns. And sometimes great ideas come from someone that, might not work at a lobbying firm or might not have any experience or really have a name yet, but they've got a good idea, and then that legislator can take it and turn it into something bigger.
Thank you. Mark, we'll go back to you for this one. How does the NCAA and member institutions benefit from relationships with sports betting entities, data sharing for lines, the brief Colorado, Michigan State advertising, kind of along those lines?
So from a regulatory or specific to the regulatory piece, it's really important to have a relationship with them. Partly what Mary Beth described was they have an obligation to report stuff to us. They have really rich data. If you're not careful, you can misread that data. There's a lot of stuff there. So having people that we can rely on and communicate who are seeing the betting behavior, they see behind the screen, and only the regulator, and not all regulators get to see it, I don't think, but there's very few people that get to see behind the curtain. And so having that relationship with their compliance staff, their integrity staff, to be able to better understand what they're seeing and how that applies to our rules, the NCAA's rules, is helpful. The other thing we've seen is there's just a real opportunity and exists for then to further conversations around things like prop bets, around things like advertisement. And so we really need to coexist. Actually, our interests are really similarly aligned. I know that sounds really weird, but they want integrity in the contest. And they're not looking for people to be harmed. That's not what they're after. And so, again, just the better relationship we have, the more open dialogue we have, it breaks down some barriers, and it breaks down probably some perceptions that aren't right. So that's where I would say there's a variety of different reasons why it's really good to have that relationship.
Awesome. Tom, this one will be the last question from the audience before we close up, but is the NCAA considering conducting similar gambling, sports wagering surveys for coaches?
We've been asked this question before. We've recently conducted a mental health study with coaches, and that was really interesting in terms of all the pressures that they are feeling on various topics, whether it be transfer or just the expectations that they and their staffs have. I would love to know about the attitudes and behaviors of coaches around sports betting. I'm sure this would be a more difficult ask, though, to get honest data, given what's on the line for our coaches. But there may be folks who have ideas, and I'd be happy to hear them. Certainly, there are probably some opportunities for qualitative studies in this area as well.
Thanks. To close up, I'll go down the line. We'll start with Mary Beth here, and then go down. Can you each talk about one takeaway that you'd like to share before we close?
Well, my takeaway is really something that I didn't touch on but wanted to touch on, and that is our focus in the years to come, and a big focus of the past year has been education on illegal sports books, because they can look identical to legal sports books. And I think a lot of, especially college age and minors, they cannot tell the difference. And that creates a problem for many reasons, because with illegal sports books, you can have credit extended. You don't have the same checks and balances on if you want to take a cool-off period or exclude yourself from the ability to gamble. And you can really dig yourself into a hole quickly. And that can then cause an integrity issue, because you might have to try to dig out of that hole in some way as a student athlete. So we have started with our team really emphasizing not only trying to eradicate those sports books, but to educate others about them. And I hope anyone would encourage in your state the same thing in Tennessee. If you want some educational resources on that, we are happy to oblige.
Thanks. Mark?
Yeah, I guess in closing, from my perspective, I just say we have to be really hyper vigilant around gambling harms, and that's the mental health piece of your student athletes and your staff. We have to be hyper vigilant to the integrity issues. Another reason why it's good to work with sports books, because they'll tell us, again, they don't want integrity issues either. And I think probably the last part is just the harassment. And when I say being hyper vigilant, it just means we all need to be on alert for those three things. All your schools are different. You staff differently, so there's not a one-size-all approach. But I would start with having a dialogue about how are we helping our student athletes? What do we do about harassment? Are we talking to them about it? Are we constantly talking to them about integrity and about people asking them for information? So it's just, I think it's being very intentional around those three things. So, I mean, it's a big challenge. It's not going anywhere. It's going to be with your incoming freshmen who are going to bring their own gambling stuff with them, and it's here. So.
Thanks, Mark. Tom?
The one thing that comes to mind is when we look at these data and think about how they relate to college students generally, you can see there are a lot of aspects that are probably similar to what we would find in a non-athlete population. So things like the genesis of sports betting behaviors and how they interact with sports books and so on. There are some unique pieces there, their involvement with the contest integrity, harassment, and it comes to my mind that maybe we can take advantage of some aspects of the athletic experience to help develop something on campus more broadly that can help students. So for instance, when you ask student athletes, what would encourage you not to bet on sports? The top two things that they've always mentioned, men and women both, I don't want to disappoint my coaches, don't want to disappoint my teammates. And is there a way we can leverage the coach relationship, the teammate relationship to create peer-developed and delivered messages around harm reduction and so on? And can that be scaled or can we create something in the student body that might have similar benefits? I'd like to see something like that over the coming years.
Thanks, Tom. As we closed up, Mark mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to note that we're excited to announce that we've rolled out a new e-learning platform focused on educating coaches around the dangers of sports betting. The platform is now live in the NCAA Learning Portal. That's the free course. And this is a follow-up to our free student athlete e-learning module that was rolled out around this time last year. It's available on ncaa.org/sportsbetting. And then my last note here, please fill out the session evaluation survey for feedback about today's session on the convention app. You'll find that survey embedded in today's session description. As a reminder, that's also where you can go to access a link to Tom's sports betting slides, and you'll find a link to the NCAA's Draw the Line sports betting resources as well. I want to thank these three for being here today and providing some valuable insights, and thank you all for attending the session, and enjoy the rest of NCAA convention.
Thank you.